So glad you could join us this morning. I'm Marlin Bohling, your tour guide to the ag commodities. Well, here it is Thursday, and that means it's weekly export sales day. We got the numbers out a short time ago, and here on board to talk about it, we have Chris Swift with us. He's with Swift Trading. He's based in Nashville, and he joins us this morning. Chris, let's take a look at our overnight export sales. The weekly export sales. The corn, 898,400 tons this time around. And we had the soybeans coming in at 436,200 tons. Meanwhile, soybean meal, 154,100 tons. Soy oil, 3,200. And we had wheat at 308,300 tons this time around. Meanwhile, grain sorghum sales, 2,700 tons. Upland cotton, we had 166,400 running bales. Meanwhile, rice, 92,500 tons. Overall, your take on what the weekly numbers showed us on this table, maybe on corn and soybeans first.
What it really tells us is that even though we see time frames where there's a lull within the purchasing, they still have to have large quantities. When I say they, primarily China, because we know we're trying to feed a huge hog population. And now even with more ASF in the Dominican Republic, even though that is a very small part of pork production, it leads us to believe that there will be even greater concern to put more pork production in a controlled environment, therefore always needing more controlled feed sources.
Let's look at our overnight trade, and then I also want to stop here in a little bit and take a look here at what happened with our overnight export sales business. We'll get to that in a second. Corn overnight, a little bit firmer. It looks like we're trading December about 2 3/4 higher at 549.5 per bushel, and all the deferreds beyond that are exactly 2 cents higher. Now, meanwhile, soybeans overnight had a little bit of pressure. We have November down 4 3/4 cents at 13.21 per bushel after hitting a high of 13.27 1/4. However, just a few moments ago, we got word from USDA that we actually had an overnight export sale to talk about for a change. Haven't seen that much in the last several weeks, and what it was an overnight sale of soybeans. It was to unknown destinations. The amount, 300,000 tons. And it was for the current marketing year for 2021 and 2022. How is that going to help the cause or not? Or is the trade just going to shrug it off? I mean, it's a pretty good total there, but don't know if it's an earth-shaking thing.
Well, I don't think they'll shrug it off simply because we still have significant weather. So I know that northwest quadrant remains very, very dry, and the beans just a little bit more in hardship than what the corn is in those areas. And I think a lot of traders are not going to do much until we see what USDA comes out with next Thursday on their WASDE report, if there's any kind of change in the yield. Any kind of change. We don't think there'll be any change in the number of acres, but clearly maybe some harvested acres where we lose some of those acres in that northwest quadrant.
And we keep hearing all that talk about Brazilian and Argentine farmers wanting to add to their acreage for this upcoming crop year. Of course, they won't be planning for a few months yet, but one has to wonder how much pressure that would put on the deferred contracts down the road.
Well, probably not a great deal of pressure just yet until we see that they can, A, get the acres out, and B, if they can get those acres in. They still are having drought troubles just like what we are. So when we talk about additional acres now, we have to consider that those additional acres may only substitute for any acres that we lose during the drought.
Let's look at our wheat market overnight with our quotes provided by bar chart here. And you had the Chicago wheat on September 3 higher at 7.20 1/4, so it didn't move very far. On the wheat in Kansas City, September was 2.5 cents higher at 6.96 3/4. You know the top end of that range overnight on KC wheat? Exactly $7. Now on spring wheat in Minneapolis, you had September a penny higher at 9.04, and that would be about 3.5 cents from its low of the overnight trade, but it did close a little bit higher. Welcome back, and we'll take a look at our livestock trade. Oh, we have some beef and pork export numbers to talk about. What were they like this morning? We'll find out in a moment. We are talking with Chris Swift of Swift Trading. He's based in Nashville. Well, before the break, I alluded to the fact that USDA released their weekly export sales numbers. We covered the grain side in the crop markets, but what about on the meat exports? Well, let's take a look at the beef and the pork numbers. This past week, we apparently sold 15,100 tons of U.S. beef. The vast majority of it, 15,000 tons of it, was for this current calendar year. That was down 33% from what we had a week ago. By the way, we had 100 tons exactly that was earmarked for 2022, and it was all for Japan this time. On the pork side, 38,800 tons. That was said to be 1% higher than what we had last week, and it was up 32% from the 4-week average. China was in there. 18,300 tons of pork last week. Mexico bought 9,200 tons this past week. So pretty sizable buys. By the way, it looks like China was in there also buying 2,300 tons of U.S. beef last week. So they are in the market here, Chris.
I've seen China a couple of times, and I've been talking with some producers that are actually taking the time and effort to produce their cattle in a manner that will allow them to be exportable to China. So we're seeing more and more of that here in the U.S., and we always want to open up as many trade routes as we possibly can, and China is always a great big one to try to get a hold of. So I can see where we probably will continue with the pork exports as we have. Beef is still so high right now, and especially when you look at the box prices, I think that's curtailing a little bit of the demand for beef.
On the futures trade yesterday, we finished up with October live cattle 82 higher at 128.97. On the feeder cattle market, well, we wrapped up the day yesterday with September 35 cents higher at 162.87. That was about 80 cents off of its high of the day. And on the lean hog market yesterday, we finished with October $1.25 lower at 90.12. So that was off of its earlier high of the day by about $1.50. Now, we did have gains, once again in the beef cutout values that came out on the close yesterday. This is the afternoon update, and pretty sizable gains there, $3.50 higher on the choice cuts. That's quite a trend we put together here the last week or so.
Well, it is, and all of it is due to the slower processing speed. So when you look at the total number of cattle on feed and you look at the weights not dropping any, so we're fairly current, but we're not all that current because we're not seeing the weights decline. So I think that's a lot of what you're seeing in the boxes is just slow processing.
All right, on the pork side, if we look at the carcass values yesterday afternoon, we had them dropping $4.68. They were priced at $122.99. That belly market finally kind of stabilized a little bit. Yesterday, it was just 53 cents higher on the afternoon update. Well, great stuff. Thanks, Chris, for the information this morning. Chris Swift of Swift Trading. He's based in Nashville. Janet, we are about ready to get rolling here at the bottom of the hour on the markets.